Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Raise your hand if you hate HOAs. Yes, our OP will support you. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. Revenge on the HOA. I hate my HOA. The only reason I live here is because the house was dirt cheap at the end of 2010. For the most part, I haven't had a lot of complaints, but during the lockdown, I decided I wanted to give my yard some much-needed TLC. It started with putting a gazebo in my backyard. I secured all the permissions I was told I needed and completed the work. Not 2 weeks after completion, I received a letter stating it was out of compliance. After 2 weeks of arguing, I had to literally pick up my 3,000-pound redwood gazebo and move it 3 more feet from the wall. Now I get letters complaining about the vegetation in my front yard. I get it. It's been neglected for a while. I'm doing my best to comply, but the trash guy only comes once a week, so I can't throw away much yard waste at a time. Cue more angry letters and enter the malicious compliance. I decided that I'm going to remove my tree and replace it. I also want to remove 5 plants. One of them is clearly dead by now. Their paperwork specifies that I have to submit 1 item per design change request. So I submitted 7 different requests, 1 for each plant, 1 for the tree removal, 1 for tree installation. Now they're sending me generic copy-paste replies saying that I can change the yard. None of them specify what design change was approved. I just keep replying to all of them asking for clarification. The last one said it was for the tree removal and planting of a new tree, but it didn't include the original letter or even a reference number. So I just replied back and said I would like the specific letter included in the email so I can have an approval paper trail. They burned me bad with the gazebo incident. I won't get burned again, and I'm having a grand time wasting as much of their time as possible. I smile every time I reply to an email asking for specific information. And our second story. She probably didn't learn, but I felt better. So this happened like 15 years ago. I was living in Italy and got a job through an agency as a secretary for a lawyer. In his office, his 40-year-old daughter was working too. I actually don't know what she did, except boss me around. When they hired me, they told me that she was impressed about my level of Italian, being my 3rd language that I had only talked for 4 or 5 years. But as soon as I started working and her father, the lawyer, started to trust me, she turned evil. She did a lot of things, but to name a few, she mumbled when I came in the office, and when I asked her what she said, she'd scream at me that I was hopeless and didn't understand simple words like ciao. She knew people living in Italy for 3 months that spoke better Italian than me. If I left the office for something and was transcribing a case so it was open on the computer, closed office so no breach in security, she would go in and make some changes to the text to make me look bad. If I had case files out, she would sneak in and hide them from me. She kept on talking bad about me to every client coming in the studio, especially if they were friendly towards me. She threw my things on the floor more than once. I noticed that everyone was surprised that I stayed on. Turned out that she'd been horrible to all the secretaries they had, and in the 6 months before me, they had 5 other secretaries, and they had all quit because she was so horrible towards them. The girl before me was a bit on the chubby side, and when I got the job, the daughter said in earshot of the other girl, "Good thing we got a normal-sized secretary now, otherwise we'd have to widen the doors." The girl looked destroyed. That incident should have been my warning. She did much more, and when my 6 months through the agency ended, I was supposed to stay around, but after a discussion with her father, the lawyer, who knew what a bee she was, he decided that he couldn't keep me. But his words were, "I would rather keep you than her, but she's such a bee that she can't do crap, so no one will hire her if I don't let her pretend that she works here. I can't throw her out." I understood him, but I was still pissed with her. So my last day while she was out for lunch, I went into her office and unscrewed the connections for her mouse and the keyboard to the computer. I didn't pull them all the way, just enough to not work, but you couldn't see it. Here's where I have to add that I like technology and computers and could handle myself good with them. My previous job was managing an internet cafe. The bee was convinced that I didn't know anything, something she pointed out more than once. And even though I had done a lot with the office computers and saved us some money, reducing the times we had to call an external technician. When she came back from lunch, she couldn't get her computer to work. She screamed for me to call a technician. I, to be honest, offered to fix it, but she screamed that I was a good-for-nothing and I had to make the technician rush over no matter the cost. The technician comes and she's really rude to him, treats him like crap. It's no surprise that he fixed it very quick, and afterwards he came into my office to leave me the bill. The town was quite small and he used to be the technician for the internet cafe, so he knew me well. Technician: did you do that? Me: maybe. Technician: she's a real bee. She deserves it. So if you did that, she must have done something bad. So I doubled the bill. He smiled and dropped the bill on my desk and left. Half an hour later, my last day there was over, and I left feeling a little happier about myself. And the day after, I had a flower sent home to my house together with an envelope with 3 months of pay and a letter from the lawyer saying that he would miss me in the office, and this is the last time he'll let his daughter ruin a secretary for him, and next time he'd kick her out. Small revenge, but it felt good doing it. Wow, how spineless of him. Oh, I know she does nothing, but if I don't keep her, no one else will take her. Oh, and I know I fired you because of it, but I won't do it to the next person. I'll fire my daughter next time. Just fire your daughter now. Keep the secretary you actually like. How spineless. And our last story. Hippity hippity, you lose your jobbity. Bippity boppity boo, they endanger child too. Shortly after college, I worked for an auto insurance company called All Forward Thinking General Lizard Farm. I went to body shops, tow yards, and people's homes to inspect vehicles that were damaged in car accidents, write estimates, pay body shops for repairs, etc. I was really good at my job because I grew up around auto mechanics and body shop repair technicians. I'd learned as a teen that these shops were no place for a child. There were tools, chemicals, and of course, cars inside body shops that children should not be near. This took place the January I started my job. I was spending a day at one particular shop at which I had gotten to know the staff and manager really well. Shop manager, Clark, was a married man with 3 kids, and his oldest was in college and working full-time at the shop. Clark's son, Clark Jr., worked as a receptionist. This was a very corporate-minded shop, so everything was run legally. They had an accounts manager, Harley, and the shop had estimators of their own, Bruce, Barry, and Diana. Clark, Harley, Bruce, Barry, and Diana all had their own offices. There was a main reception area for customers to sit, and all the action in the shop took place through swinging double doors next to the receptionist's counter. The doors were painted red with signs warning people about fumes, hazardous conditions, and not to go into the area without safety gear. This is essentially information for what happens next. On this day, EM, entitled Mom, arrived with EK, entitled Kid, who was about 2 or 3 years old. I was sitting in Clark's office when EM arrived, which was directly on the other side of the reception area from the front door. EM practically yanked EK's right arm to lead him into the shop, and EK whined. I didn't do anything because it wasn't the first time I'd seen a child pulled like that, but I didn't like it. Clark Jr. Hey, how can I help you today? EM. I'm here to see ED, entitled Dad. Clark Jr. Okay, I'll see if I can get him for you. EM. I'm kind of in a hurry, so please make it fast. EM sat down and started playing on her phone. Clark Jr. put on his protective gear, goggles, and a mask for the fumes and went through the doors. Clark and I had to go to Harley's office, which was behind the desk, to make copies. We walked in front of the red swinging doors just in time because EK ran towards the doors. Clark put out his arm to block the kid and gently guided him back to the reception area. Things went from 0 to 100 real quick. EM threw down her phone and jumped up from the sofa she was sitting on. What are you doing to my child? Don't touch him. Clark. I'm sorry, ma'am, but he's not allowed back there, and he was running into the shop area. He was going to see his father. She snatched EK up, who was crying by now, and picked him up. All this yelling in a naturally quiet shop also drew a crowd. Diana, Bruce, and Barry were now watching from their offices as well. To make matters worse, Clark Jr. came back with ED, so there were now half a dozen adults watching this scene unfold. He's just a child, EM shrieked. Harley. Ma'am, even though he's just a child, he isn't allowed into the shop. There are dangerous things back there. ED walked over to EM and took EK from her. EM. I don't care. Don't tell me how to raise my effing child. She looked over at Clark. And don't put your effing, racial slur, hands on my child either. I should point out now that Clark Jr. and I are all African American. I personally had a few words for EM at this point, but Clark responded first. He said to ED, "Just take her outside and talk to her, please." ED, "Did you put your hands on my child?" Clark, "I don't want to discuss this right now. Just talk to her outside." EM, "That jerk put his hands on our child, ED. He had no right to do that." ED, "You shouldn't be touching my child, Clark." Harley, ED? ED, No, this is my child, and I'm going to set some rules for all of you. Don't touch my child. I don't care what he's doing. You ain't his parents, so you ain't got a right to touch our child. That goes for all of you. Now, I understand Clark is Mr. Big Boss Man around here, but this is my child, and you have no right to touch him. Clark, "Just go home, all three of you." ED, "You're fired." EM and ED really started yelling then. Even though the child started crying again, they called Clark and his son the same racial slur a handful of times, with FUs to the corporate body shop, Clark, the entire office, and threats of a lawsuit. Then they left, slamming the glass front door of the building hard enough to crack the bottom half of the door. The threats of a lawsuit were carried out as I overheard conversations between Clark and the corporate shop's lawyers. Harley, Diana, and everyone else had to give statements about what they'd overheard. And I even testified at a deposition that EM and ED had used racial slurs, foul language, and had damaged the shop's glass door, which in wintertime was even worse because of fluctuating temperatures. As far as I know, EM and ED did not win their lawsuit. But seriously, people can be so obnoxious. Glad your boss fired him before things got more out of hand. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.